J. Cole is under fire for this line on his most recent album. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Now, the particular line of contention is this line here, where he mentions a trans fella. I'm not going to read the whole verse here, just because it says some things here that I'm not. I would prefer not to repeat or say. Um, but I'll read this part of this last line here. In cancel culture's vicinity, he's no, trust me, beneath his chosen identity. Now, I'm going to emphasize the cancel culture's vicinity because as we continue on, we'll see this is what's kind of happening right now, particularly based on this particular line. Now, that's not to say that I think J. Cole said is correct. Not to say that I think it's good, but I do think there's a tendency to cancel people right away. And as we continue on in the video, you'll see why I think there might be a bit of a double standard with that particular view. So let's go down here. Let's look at some of the comments, particularly from Twitter and I believe some other social medias. So let me scroll down a little bit here. So here on Vibe, they're explaining what this particular line is saying. He says, the couplets find Cole attempting to ridicule his foes by alleging that they're posturing as masculine men despite being inherently feminine. Now, obviously, we've seen this attack on masculinity. Now, I do think that there's a sense which masculinity can be elevated to a level that is unhealthy. But I do think what we're seeing happening now is that all of masculinity is being looked at as a bad thing. And I think that's the wrong approach. Society tends to go from one extreme to the other. And that's not what's best for anyone. So here it says, a number of listeners took offense to the lyrics, expressing as much with posts accusing the rapper of promoting. So this is a comment here from, I believe this is coming from Twitter, but here's what this commenter says. An artist as big as J. Cole shouldn't be getting away with these weirdly transphobic lines anymore, wrote one user. Another was more pointed in their criticism, writing, F. J. Cole for his transphobic bar. By the way, this ish is not cool. So what's interesting here as I continue on with the article is they'll point out how J. Cole has done this in the past, particularly in 2014. See if I can highlight this here a little so you can kind of see it on the screen. He apparently dropped a line dealing with autism. And later on, as we'll drop down here, we'll see that after a petition, J. Cole came out and apologized. He says, I said something highly offensive to people with autism, and he owned it. He apologized. So obviously, by now you've seen that J. Cole has apologized for his diss track to Kendrick Lamar. I have not yet seen if he has apologized for this particular comment. Judging by some of the articles that I ran into, does not seem to be that way. And let's go look at this. Take a look at this Yahoo article here. It says, yeesh, and by yeesh I mean yikes, and by yikes I mean man. J. Cole is really out here dropping poorly thought out transphobic bars. Beyond using trans as an insult and sinking in a bit of misogyny to boot, the implication that trans men are still women is by definition transphobic. I would disagree with quite a few parts in that sentence. But one thing I want to point out is becoming really quick to push out this discharge of misogyny, but not always weighing out what those necessarily means. Now, obviously, I disagree with this particular sentence as a whole. So misogyny would be a attack on women. And by definition, if we're going to look at a scientific definition, can you really get away from the fact that there's only two? Just saying. So he continues. He says, a generous reading is at the bar about the trans fella. It's an overwritten attempt to call the subject of his ire a coward gone wrong. That he was more concerned with coming across as clever and bad that he was about making any grand statements on gender identity. So the author here is trying to, quote unquote, be a little more gracious. So he continues. Even with such grace granted, it illustrates how Cole approaches LGBTQ plus subject matters, and unfortunately, it's not the first sentence. So he points out that this seems to be a reoccurring thing within J. Cole's music. I am not going to read this. It's on the screen. I'll leave it up for a little bit so you can look at it. He says, all of which is to say, it's 2024. And in 11 years of rapping, Cole still has to learn that maybe he shouldn't use the LGBTQ plus community as a punchline. Okay, so here's where I'm going to have some pushback. Obviously, the pushback is on this particular line dealing with the trans community. Now, what I find interesting is for a culture that is so focused on calling people out for being hypocritical, it is astonishing to see the double standard here. Right? The rest of the track is talking about taking lives, but you don't hear much mention about that. Completely ignore that aspect of it. Just focus on this particular part. This is part of the problem with some of rap or hip hop music, right? We see this with multiple artists, not just J. Cole. Um, and I won't go as far as to say that this is embedded into the genre itself, as I've heard some other people do in the past. But I do think it's something that's propagated, unfortunately, far too often. This is something that hip hop artist D1, who is a Christian, recently he was making headlines, right? You heard about him replying or responding back to Joe Budden, or Joe Budden responding back to him. He was on a couple of different interviews talking about some of the issues within hip hop music, hip hop culture, and how there's some inconsistencies with how this is being promoted. So let me go ahead and share this other article here. The one here says, Jim Jones, you can do better, brother. I love you too much. I love you too much not to be honest with you. Rick Ross, you could do better, brother. Meek Mill, you could do better, brother. I love you too much not to be honest with you. This man out here glorifying getting people. The artist commented. The article here continues, mentions some of the lyrics in these particular songs, right? Blank in the streets, I call it a feast. Here he says, I just recognize that I'm in hip hop. I'm in an industry where music and messaging is packaged up in such a catchy way that it's like, man, this is cool. I'm vibing to this. But deep down in my heart, I know this isn't right according to God. So this is where I want to emphasize this double standard, right? You're taking issue with a particular line while ignoring these other aspects where, and what's interesting is that a lot of times this community will be very outspoken about saying things like, or promoting the organization Black Lives Matter, but you're only focusing on one particular aspect of this track while ignoring the rest. I just don't think that that's the best way to approach it. As we celebrate hip hop being 50 years old and the 50th year of hip hop, I just think that it's a great time to practice what I call transformative love. D1 explained. Transformative love means you're not going to sit here and simply affirm everything about hip hop just because you are a part of it. You're going to be able to love it from a place of being able to be critical of it in the ways that it needs to improve. That's where I'm at. And I think this is a good outlook to take, right? We can embrace different music. We can embrace different aspects of the culture while disregarding those things that are contradicting to human flourishing, right? That are not what's best for mankind. And I think that's what we should all be doing. Now, for Christians, this means that while we want to embrace different aspects of culture, different aspects of different kinds of music, we should be careful and mindful that what we are embracing does not contradict what Jesus Christ taught, and does not contradict what the scriptures teach. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you next time.